I'll just click that, got it. Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to first of all thank the Winfield Historical Society and Adrienne as president and the entire board for inviting me to speak once again. And also Dawn here at the Winfield Library, and definitely Matt Sutter, who I've known for quite some time. That's the director of the library, for inviting me back. So thank you very much. So what I'm going to attempt to do tonight, the title of the talk is really Daleiden and Schlick Family, a genealogical case study. So genealogy is the study of family history and family trees, as we may call it. But I'm going to really do a show and tell because we could be here all night with the information I have. So I have to keep super focused on things. So I'm going to select some stories of the ancestors, particularly from the Daleiden, or my grandfather used to pronounce it Daleiden or Daleiden, so whichever you prefer there. And the Schlick family. So those are the two families I'm going to focus in on tonight. We're also going to integrate some stories of Winfield history with this, including history, a little bit about St. John's Church, because that dovetails in with the Daleiden family. And then the Elsan store and the Daleiden store that used to be here, Bill Daleiden store that used to be here in Winfield. And some other buildings, including the Winfield Cooperative Creamery we're going to meet, because that was owned by one of the Daleidens for a while, that property, after the creamery was gone. And the other thing I hope to do along the way is just point out some genealogical family resources I use to get me to the point where I could put the pieces together to trace these ancestors on there. So, go ahead. So when I'm showing off first here, so this is sort of like an introduction. This is DuPage County, and you can't see it, but this is 1870 map of DuPage County. And the blue arrow right here focuses in on Winfield Township, which is kind of my centerpiece of what I'm looking at, and then Winfield, the three major cities or towns within Winfield Township. And here's Mark Turner Junction. Anybody know what that one is? West Chicago, there we go. Okay, good, you're doing fine. Winfield and then Warrenville. So these three towns, I know for definitely the Daleidens and the Schlicks were definitely going to constantly for resources, for work and other things of that nature. So if you want to turn this slide, and this is a 1862 Winfield Township map, primarily showing the part of Winfield Township here, and then note kind of crowds in our map, again showing Fredericksburg, which is what our town we're in was originally platted as Fredericksburg. It's mentioned here that this is Winfield Station, and along here is the, at the time 1862, I know we called it Chicago Northwestern, the Metro line now. I think originally it was the Chicago and Galena Union Railway that ran through the area, and then it split off here at Turner Junction on that. Other things I want to point out on this map is one of the reasons that attracted a lot of people to emigrate and settle in this area, or a lot of the woodlands that are shown throughout here. That's what all this is along here, because to settle in an area and to decide you want to settle down in an area, you need access to water, you need access to timber to build things, maybe to more and more homes, and also plenty of open land to farm and to till in the open prairies of Illinois and Winfield Township. The other piece of water that comes through this area, this is the west branch of the DuPage River that kind of meanders through this area and here. Right over here is actually where the Daleiden family actually ended up purchasing the property, right next to the Mack family. And this is kind of Mack Road. You may not see that from where it's at, but that's kind of centerpiece. So this west DuPage of the river definitely flows through Winfield and plays an integral part to these families as well as a source of water resources and recreation at times. So, okay. This next map or drawing was drawn by Larry Enders. He happened to be a neighbor that grew up on Beecher Street. He was getting across from me. But he drew this from memory with the aid of other residents of what Winfield was like in 1905. What I have done on here, though, is I highlighted in pink and starred, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different sites that we're going to talk about tonight. that are integral to the history of this family. We'll get more details about that. You've got St. John's Church here. Next door was Christopher Daleiden's home. And then over on this side, this is the Winfield Cooperative Creamery, but Christopher Daleiden actually owned about, my grandfather remembers, about 10 acres of open farmland out there that uses a hayfield. So he eventually owned the building that was on the Cooperative Creamery and the home. On lot number 32 here, which is called Main Street, we call that now Winfield Road. And you notice how that kind of dead ends where the school building's at on there. So all the street names are different on this 1905 map. Again, we've got the West Branch of the DuPage River flowing through here, little Nat Schremer's farm out on the west side. And then up at the top up here is actually the location of what was originally the Balm store, if I've got that straight, eventually became the Bluebird Confectionery and Billiard Parlor. And later up here, up on this piece of property on Elizabeth Street, which is now Jewel Road, right at this corner, although it's not marked on the map, is where the Elsan building was originally built. That's kind of where Bill Daleiden's store was put in place on there, and occupied one of the stores on there. So, okay, you can turn it. And I explained this with regards to the people on Zoom there. I'll explain it kind of again so you guys have heard this. This is sort of my game card for tonight of what we're going to be talking about. Up at the top, I don't want to disregard the two people at the top, Johann Daleiden, two Johann Daleidens, but the people we're going to talk about mainly tonight, though, would be Christopher Daleiden, his son, William Daleiden, and William's son, William B. Daleiden. So in order to keep the characters straight here, the family members, William T. and William B. So keep that in mind. And then Susan Daleiden was Casper's daughter. She married Casper Schlick. They had 3 sons. One of those was my grandfather, Frank Schlick. And then down here, which is kind of covered by that, is my parents, Louise Schlick. She was Frank Schlick's daughter. And then down here is my wife and I finally down in the end. So this is like a direct kind of bloodline that I've been able to trace of how they're related to Christopher Daleiden mainly. And then Christopher's father is right above them too. Okay, so we're going to start out with some of Christopher's stories here on that. This is actually a close-up from a, is this okay to stand here? Is that? Okay, all right. Christopher Daleiden. So this is a close-up picture of Christopher Daleiden. When he actually did his close-up, what has he got in his eye there? It's like a monocle. I'm like, wow. This is it's like a German, true German there. I didn't see that when I saw the picture, but so the 4 things why you need to know about Christopher, why I thought was great about this gentleman was, number 1, he was on the founding committee for St. John's Church. He was one of the original landowners with his brother, Michael Daleiden, on Mack Road for the farm that eventually became Susan Schlick and John Schlick's property on Mack Road. And then he was also became, in his retirement, he purchased property in the downtown area of Winfield and built a home here, as well as his son and his grandson eventually became merchants and people in the town here. Last but not least, he became also one of the owners of the Winfield Cooperative Creamery property, not the creamery, but the property on Beecher Avenue. So where did Christopher and his brother come from? As far as I have been able to tell, this is an area map showing a period of 1850 and 1871 of unification of Germany. They basically came from this area near the Luxembourg border in an area which was called Trier-Saarburg area. So why don't you check that? So take a look at that. This is a little bit closer look on this. And one of the interesting things I read in Louis Spanky's book is that when you go to the city of Bitburg that is within this area, you do a 20-mile radius from that city, you find that a good majority of the residents on the 1860 U.S. Census in Winfield came pretty much within a 20-mile radius of that city of Bitburg, which is in that area. So, and I think one city that kept coming up on there was the city of Daleiden. If I mispronounce names, I'm sorry about that. On that, so that was one town that I believe one of our family members came from. So their trip They started out in Antwerp in Belgium, went to New York City. That's a 4,603-mile trip across the North Atlantic Ocean, which is very rough seas. They were sailing on the E.C. Scranton sailing ship. And that journey, I'm told, and this is not a steamship yet, nor a big, huge ocean liner. This was really a sailing ship. Took 2 to 3 months on average for most of those trips to go across the ocean. That's a long time to stay on one ship. So, and at the time we're looking at here, in the 1850s, there were over 1 million Germans that emigrated to America in the 1850s. So this is a large immigrant group coming into America. In 1856, we'll go back. Just one last point on that. That's okay. 1856, we have 215,000 Germans coming in on that time frame. Why do I focus in on that date? That is around the time that I approved that the Daleidens either, through immigration records and passenger lists, immigrated to America or finally settled in this area here and settled down. So,
okay.
Yeah. And to give you an idea of how they were traveling on this, so again, keep in mind this is not a nice steamship at all, but they were in this family bunk area, what was called on these ships, which is between the stork steerage and the top deck of the ship. So you can kind of see some crew bunk beds are built up on here. Sometimes there were only what you call hammock type things set up, and sometimes they had to share when they were living in these quarters. And needless to say, there were some people that did not survive that ocean journey. There were either kids, little smaller kids or infants that passed away on that, or grandparents or elderly that were traveling that just didn't make it, and things on that. So that gives you an idea of how they were traveling across the ocean and the information. I didn't do research on that. So this is the actual passenger list in the port of New York when they came in, the people that are listed on here on this. So we're starting up here. This is right at number 90 through 94. We have Matthias Daleiden, who is the father, 53 years of age, Christopher, my great-great-grandfather, 20 years old, his brother Peter, 17, and 2 Barbaras, 22 and 13. And I think on my blog that I put up, there's a lot of different German naming nomenclatures. Sometimes people had named their daughters and brother and sons sometimes the same first name. If that's not confusing, eventually they may probably call them by their middle name on here. So this is the date on this is the 7th of December, 1857. Okay, next slide. Now this is before I talked about the tax roll records. Before Christopher came over with his father, his 2 sisters, and his brother, his older brother Michael was over before he came over with his family. So he was more of an advanced person, which was not unusual, I'm told. I've been in contact with a person at an academician that's done some work on German and French. He says it wasn't unusual to sometimes send some family members ahead of time to get settled and get things going on that. So Michael was sort of the advanced person, Christopher's older brother. And so what I needed to do was I had Michael and Christopher in an 1874 atlas owning property on that road. But I wasn't sure quite when they started to officially own that property. And I still have to delve into, I'll be honest with you, to go back into the property tax records. But I looked at what I started to do. I wanted to find out around the time when he was first paying his taxes, real estate taxes in Winfield Township. So Michael has about 60 acres there along, I'm going to assume this is Mack Road, because I noticed Mack is right next to him. And this gentleman, they would end up later buying property from Mr. Felham, who was an Englishman that settled in the area, and he had 20 pieces of property. So I think later on, the Daleidens actually purchased property. So actually kind of let you know that Michael was a good partner for Christopher, being 2 brothers working together to settle property over on Mack Road. The interesting thing too is that happened is that there was a lot of chain migration that went on, I understand, amongst immigrants. Some of the reasons why they may have immigrated were economic hardships at the home front. The other item that was going on too in parts of Germany, not all of Germany, were that inheritance of land. land would get broken up. Oh, we don't have any more property for you, older or youngest son. You're going to have to make do with what you've been given or find other places. But there was also a lot of political revolution and upset going on in Germany, in that German region, we're calling it Germany, but it was really Prussia and a bunch of broken up duchies that were living in that area at that time. So about various reasons why the Germans immigrated, a lot of it may have been economic hardship, but there's also a theory that's put forward too that in America, there were a lot of railroads starting to advertise land available along routes. Then relatives or family, friends, and neighbors were coming over and writing letters back and forth, and it took a while to do that, encouraging their neighbors and families and friends. Have you ever considered moving to America? There's a lot of plentiful land. There's, start your own churches and freedom from religion. And so those are kind of the things I have pulled out of this as to why maybe Michael and Christopher had moved to America. I think one of the things too that Louise Spanky in this book notes too is even when she was writing this, these people were pretty busy setting up their homesteads, their farms. A lot of them didn't have time to keep a diary or write letters like some upper class or upper middle class person would have hours to write diaries. So there's a lot of lack of substantial family letters and diaries to substantiate a lot of this information too. And I think Louise Spanky found that out too when she was writing her book back in 1975 as well. So I just want to mention that. So 1874, this is the 1874 DuPage County Atlas. This shows Michael and Christopher owning 80 acres right along here next to Mr. Edward Packard, their neighbor, the Fairbanks to the north. And then the Mather family had a lot of property just along the west branch of the DuPage River as well. So this is their property. There's two houses that are kind of drawn on there. And that road kind of just dead ends there. It doesn't even go over the river. There's no bridge to go over the river at all. And that was one of the challenges. Matt and other people on the farmers on that side, they had to drive all the way towards what is now Winfield Road to get anywhere to go back up north or even go further west. You can imagine, we got this truckload of something to bring our ride in. Oh my God, okay, we gotta go back to Winfield Road, then back up and over to what is it, Cornell Road or Barry's Mill Road to get back up to Turner Junction or something. So for a while, that was a big pain. Needless to say. Okay. And this is the U.S. Census. Again, genealogy sources, as I've shown you, maps are a good source. Look in the area you're living at or your relatives came from maps and back maps. The other big thing which genealogists use a lot, and it's mentioned a lot on TV programs, are the census. That kind of links where you can kind of place people if you're lucky enough to know kind of where they started out at and that. So this is the U.S. Census for 1880. So the good thing about this is, and each census kind of showed different information about each family. Up at the top up here, we have Michael Daleiden, who's now married to Susan Currents, is married, his mother-in-law is living with him, which is not unusual for families. 70 years old. He has a boy and a girl, Matthias, 7, and Mary, 3, I believe that is. And he married Susan Currents, thank you. There's a lot of Susans and a lot of the same first names here. So my wife's helping me out a lot with just keeping this straight. So, and then down below here, of course, is Chris Daleiden, who has a lot next door to, at this time, 1880, Christopher, and then his wife Maggie, and then his 4 children here, Barbara, William T, I will call him, and then my great grandmother, Susan Daleiden here, she's only 4 years old in 1880. So again, they give relationships on here, the ages, what's your occupation? Well, we got a farmer written here. Of course, the ladies back then, keeping home. This is what they did. A lot of hard work, a lot of these people did to keep their farms and families together and stuff, and their mother-in-law living with them, taking care of her at the same time. And then, of course, Edward Packard Matt, who was also fair weather for me to find out where the lines were at, because I knew if I located a map on the census, I knew I would soon find a line somewhere next door on that research. So, and this is kind of looking straight as you're headed west on Mac Road. So believe it or not, this is what you have here. I don't know the exact date of this photograph. We can kind of surmise there's an automobile back in here, So this had to be roughly, and I'm guessing here with this, 1905, maybe 1910, somewhere in there. Don't quote me on that. The other thing this shows too is they had a bank barn, which was not unusual for a lot of Midwest farmers to have those. You could drive your wagon right up into the top with a threshing floor. Below, you probably had, and Casper and Christopher and Michael all had dairy cows. There was a big industry here in DuPage County, anything west of Chicago. You had a lot of dairy farms transporting all their milk to that they couldn't use on their farm in the city of Chicago on that, or the local creamers will find out on that. So these are pictures you don't often see on this, and this road always had a large dog leg. I'll never forget, even as a kid for a while. Here, and around. And then you went, eventually when they had a bridge over the DuPage River, eventually to Route 59. So, okay. Probably the next large event and related to Winfield history was the establishment of St. John's Catholic Church here in town. That was 1867. Christopher and Michael were involved in the founding of the church, 1867. So what they did was they, along with all these other people, and I thought this was important to include, they were just not, it's just not him dealing with the Archbishop in Chicago. It was a group of all these local merchants and a lot of farmers going into the city of Chicago, I would imagine, all together to petition this gentleman, an Irish Catholic, the bishop of the Archdiocese of Chicago, to say, hey, we want to establish a church here in Winfield. Some of the pitches they did to try to get this was the fact that we had a railroad stop here in town. That was one of the big things. They also had the start of a school, a parochial school here in Winfield at the time. So they figured if they can convince the bishop, we've got a lot of the support from these farmers who are willing to put in some of their money to build physically the church, and the congregation was really building up with more immigrants in the area of where they were going to worship in this area. So, and the other thing that caused them to go to the bishop was they caught wind that the city of Wheaton, some of the Catholics there, were going to start building their church. So they said, we want to beat the Wheaton Catholics as to building our church here in Winfield. We think we've got a better case for it. So that was another moving impetus, I think, for these Catholic German farmers and merchants to go to petition Bishop Dugan to go to church in Winfield. So the deal that went through with the Archdiocese, we have another person, cast of characters here, Colonel Julius Warren, who owned a substantial amount of property here in Winfield. He, I believe, if I got this straight from Louis Spiken's book, for $1, there was 1 acre that was sold for the property for the church that was over on here. One of those buildings we'll talk about later was actually became St. John's School building. The stone building that's across the street from St. John's Church was actually owned by Colonel Julius Warren as well on that. And I think a lot of the stones, and this is a copy of picture of the first church, 1867. Later on, I think in 1880, they made an addition and enlarged the length of the church because the congregation was growing substantially by the time they established the church with all the number of Roman Catholic and German farmers in the area. So that's 1867. And I think it looks like a barn that's just north of that I think would eventually become Christopher Daleiden's part of his property around that side. So you kind of see a picket fence here, two running along there. I think there's even a kid or something sitting there. There's a picture taken. So, and the first wedding that took place was Christopher Daleiden married Margaret Wheeling. So that was the first wedding that actually took place. The gentleman that went into Chicago to petition the church, the first wedding that took place was between these two people, Christopher and Margaret Wheeling. So there was probably the other significant connection with the Daleidens and with Winfield. So they're living along that road, coming to church on Sundays and probably during the weekday and during holy days, traveling from that road here on what was probably a pretty rugged, muddy, dirty Winfield road to come into Winfield at the time to worship on Sunday morning and stuff. Give you another shot. I I found this, I think it was in one of the Winfield Glimpses older issues, 1968 issue. This shows one of the wagon bridges that actually went over the Spring Brook Creek. So this is Church Road, what we call Church Road. It was actually called John Street at the time, I believe. So that's one of the wagon bridges that went over. And of course, getting over this meant you got closer a little bit to the railroad tracks and to the train stations and depots on there too. So that was one of the main, I would call what I looked at this, not 1921 definitely, but definitely one of the main roads that came into the village of Winfield. You're going down today, Winfield Road, what kind of juts off. Winfield Road didn't continue on north, as it did. You kind of jut off to the side on here. Yep, all on that, yep. Okay. So the next large event that happened was in August of 1906, there was a church fire. So the entire church burned except for some of the stone walls. This picture is from my grandpa Frank Schlick's collection that I kind of inherited because my brothers and sisters didn't want anything to do with it. So they said, here, give it to Kevin, he'll take it. So I said, sure, I'll take it. So, so this is the burnt out skull of the shattered of St. John's Church. So what happened was it was during the summertime. There was a very bad summer storm that came through, thunder, lightning, and lightning struck actually the church steeple, which was made out of wood, and that kind of engulfed the steeple all the way down into the interior of the building. There was over, let's see, I think it was like a $12,000 loss, which if you can do the calculations in today's money, if this means anything, about $417,000 damage was done on that. It was only a year later, a little bit over a year later, October 1907, that the church was entirely rebuilt and they were able to use it once again. So that took a while to reconstruct that. We've got a bunch of people knowing about, so this is taken a day after the fire. Got a lot of people knowing about looking at the building, ladders up against the side, buggy and carriage off on the side here. So this is a pretty historic picture in terms of Winfield's growth and development and the history of St. John's Church as well on that. You don't? Okay, I will have to get you a copy. Yeah, I've seen other copies at a different angle, but this is kind of, and I like this because of all the people mingling about. You get a little buggy or carriage on the side, and even in an idea of the burn marks on the steeple there too. It's kind of covered.
That's 11% confirmed that we do not have that.
Okay, we'll have to get you a copy. Yeah, I thought I did do that. So, but not we'll get you another copy. Yeah. The other thing that happened on the day of the fire that I want to mention, where Christopher kind of comes to play, and I think another farmer was with him. They were determined that they wanted to try to help to put out the fire. I'm sure there were more than just two. Christopher was one of those. So this was the first pastor, the stern-looking man in the frock outfit here, the frock of the Catholic faith here, Father Wiederhold, and he was really considered his flock my kindred, or my children, and stuff, my flock. And he was actually pastor until 1921. I think he's buried up at St. John's Church up there. But people really apparently appreciated his dedication and the work he did to keep the church going and things, and to help the farmers out, definitely with their children and other things. So another important person. Basically, he told Christopher, and I think it was another farmer by the name, I think it was Sire, were together. And he said, you better get down from there. We don't want you to get killed or hurt. So, just get down from there. And so he was kind of encouraging them, don't put your life at risk. This building, we'll rebuild it. The congregation, we're still a congregation, we're a Catholic congregation, and the church is just not a building. It's the people that are part of that church and that church community. Some of the pieces that were rescued from that. I am told, I believe there were some altar pieces, a pew, and a communion rail were saved from there. And I had heard that the Stations of the Cross may have been saved too as well. So there wasn't a lot left. And a lot of just to back up, a lot of the stonework, a lot of the buildings in this area came from the Naperville quarry. So you can imagine hauling quarry rock from Naperville all the way up Winfield Road with horses, teams, and wagons to rebuild or to build a church on there. So, okay, we can move on. Okay, one of the other conditions that the bishop gave them was, you have to start a school in Winfield if you don't have one started. So part of the property was that Colonel Warren sold them, included this, which was probably formerly a home. I don't think Colonel Warren lived there, but was definitely formerly a home. So they made that into their school building and property. Now, next door, what I've got here is a picture taken. Again, my grandfather, Frank Schlick, with the blue cross up above him, standing right next to the teacher, the nun, is up at the top up here. This was probably when it was an elementary school. So it's probably late 19 teens, early 1920s, possibly. Unfortunately, I don't have the names of everybody else in this photograph. We got one young man with glasses over here, but that's kind of the classroom that my grandpa was in. Also, for a while, Grandpa Frank remembers going to Gary's Middle School, kind of on the time of year what was happening on the farm up there as well. There. So we spent some of this time at Gary's Middle School, which is actually part of his school district near his home, is my understanding at that time. So, okay. Kind of my reset slide for myself. So around this time too, the other thing is if he wasn't involved enough in his church, trying to get that going and started and helping out and getting married. Christopher also ended up with 4 children. So William T. was the standout, the only son he had. Catherine, who married John Armbrust. She married in the Armbrust family. Susan Daleiden Schlick, so she married Casper Schlick. And then this lady here, Barbara, became Sister Philippa. She became Little Sisters. What was that? Little Sisters of the
Four Handmaidens of Christ.
4 Handmaidens of Christ, which was a group of nuns that had come from Germany, started out in Donaldson, Indiana. And that's kind of where she ended up at the last part of her life as well. So, and then of course, Christopher. So the reason why I have these highlighted is we're going to talk more about, eventually hear about William T, and then William B, and then Susan Daleiden here. So, and Margaret here, I've got to delve more into her background and where she came from and things on that. So, okay, we're going to go to the next slide. The next event in Christopher's life was the fact that he was naturalized as a U.S. citizen on the 22nd of November, 1880. So again, with genealogists, the photographs are important, as we've seen, maps, census records, but the other pieces of puzzles you can put together too are looking at naturalization records. And there was a whole process to go through that sometimes took years. Sometimes it was never completed by some people, I found out. But he definitely completed it. As a matter of fact, the great thing going to the DuPage County Courthouse is you get to look at these documents, get copies made, and here's Christopher Daleiden's signature on this, kind of denouncing his allegiance to the person that was in charge of the other country, which is one of the things you had to do when you're becoming naturalized as a citizen on here. So this is 22nd of November. He finally completed his process in the DuPage County Court system. Okay, and this is from the 1904 DuPage County Atlas platform. The reason why I'm showing this is towards the end of his life, Christopher was getting up there in years. He was deciding to pull back from a little bit of his farming. I have a feeling he didn't pull back 120% on farming. Definitely turned over some things to Michael, his brother, and to other family members. So he definitely purchased property in the downtown Winfield. So at this time, I've been able to trace back that he owned these three lots. There were different sections platted out in this plot of Fredericksburg. He owned this huge hayfield, my grandfather Frank Schlick called a large hayfield, over 10.6 acres that was on the end of what is called Frederick Street, but it's now Beecher Road on here. And somewhere within this property, I believe, was the Winfield Creamery, was at that end of that Beecher Street property that was on here. We have the Daleiden home property that was on the corner here of Main and Frederick, now Winfield and Beecher Street in Lot 6 in Section 8. And then up here was the store that William B. Daleiden eventually ran until we're going to get the story about what happened to that store right there. So that's why I have 2 dots on that. It's my I think I read he didn't actually own the building. Someone else owned it, but he ran the store that was within that building. The other interesting things I want to point out in here, we have the church, the parish house are marked out on here. Mary Beecher, who I believe was a sister to Colonel Julius Warren. I think she eventually married a Jerome, who was a big business person down in Chicago. So she stole some property in Winfield on here. We have the depot. This is not the first depot for Winfield. The first one was up on this piece of property, which became eventually the best home, but was the original location of what we are now have about Winfield Road, the Hedges Station. This is Higgins' store on the corner here. So that was another big important merchant and probably the only merchant that was in town outside of what William B. Daleiden was selling out of his store down here. So Higgins' store is a very important fixture in the store down here. And not a very big community. I mean, Winfield probably was, 200, under 300 people at the time. And they all didn't live here. They lived kind of in the outskirts areas at the time. So, okay, to give you an idea, this is a 1904 St. Atlas. So you can see how the property was begun to be added on a bit here. We have, look at my cheat sheet notes here. So Christopher and Michael have divided up some property here. Here's one house, which was Michael's. Another one right at that dog leg, which we saw at that large picture there. Christopher Daleiden, here's the west branch of the DuPage River. So he had purchased a lot of property going up to what was termed at the time, I think this was the Turner Road. We now call it Route 59 along here. The other thing we notice is now we have a bridge going over the DuPage River. It doesn't end here, the road, but it ends actually here, terminating on Turner Road. So now the farmers are able to convey their goods and to transport things north and south along this road, and then they have to go all the way back along the road. And of course, we have our Pack here. Fairbanks is another large family that was in the area for quite some time down there. So that kind of gives you an idea of the extent of holdings for the 1904 Atlas and what Christopher and Michael had. I'm sure some of these were farm fields that they had plantings and things on, things I'm going to assume now at this point. Okay, and this is the Daleiden home on the 12th of October, 1906. The event going on here is, of course, the wedding of Christopher, who's up here, and Margaret Daleiden are up on the porch here, behind the railing, and Susan, the bride, and Casper Schlick, the groom. And then over on this far side is his mother, Mary Ann Armbrush Schlick. And Casper came down to this area with Susan in the year 1909 to move on to the farm on that road. As a matter of fact, they took out a mortgage with Christopher and Margaret. I found out through probate records. Can't remember what the amount was at the top of my head, but that's the house that they moved into on that road. So Susan returned to the house in which she was born in, and that's kind of where she lived out the rest of her life up to 1945. This, yeah, thank you. Lot 4, section 13, and that section of this was just north of the church. The lot just north of the church. So where you have the new church building now, that house was kind of at that corner, right there. In fact, it was kind of a hill you kind of went up to, and for a while, I remember even as a kid, it was like a cement block with this green patch, where I think that's kind of where that house was at on there. So the other person I want to mention is Martin Schlick. That was Casper's brother. The both of them farmed for a while up in the Burlington area before moving down to this area. I think Martin ended up started his family, lived in this area for a while on Mack Road, and eventually bought a home along what is Geneva Road in West Chicago, near the GE plant, not GE, but the old General Mills plant on Geneva Road. So they kind of all stuck in the area, and I'm stuck in the area. So, and then here's William T. over here, and this is his wife Susan on here. Okay, you want to switch to the next one? That's all we have to mention there. And this house, I remember talking to my grandfather as I would drive with him in the car sometime. And he says, that is Christopher Daleiden's your great grandfather's home. And I said, oh, I always thought it was near the church and they just tore it down. We said, no, this is the house that used to be, and it matches architecturally. So this house is now on Sunnyside as you're doing that kind of tour for our Winfield residents here. Yep, near the park. Yep, exactly on there. And it's still lived in. I think this is probably 2 or 3 residences. And we talked to some of the people that own these houses. We kind of gave them pictures. So this is that house that's at that corner. So when I'm like thinking back and doing all this research, I said, okay, roughly 1865, we have proof that Michael Daleiden and Christopher started owning property in DuPage County. I still have a big hole from the time they immigrated to New York to 1865, when I know I have proof that they purchased property in DuPage County. So I got a big hole. I've got to figure out what happened to them. What were they doing? Where were they living? I don't know. But it's interesting that we have 155 years. And the reason why I put 2020 is my father grew up in a home on Beecher Street. He passed away. He moved out of the house in 2019, wasn't it? And then went to an assisted living center for a while and passed away less than a year later and stuff. So we've had parts of my family, Schlick, Daleiden, and myself and my own family, Davis family, living in the Winfield area. And now again, Meredith, I don't know if it's tradition or not, or just luck finding a house in there. So so that's 155 years tradition there with people on that. So the other piece of property I want to talk about, this is on Beecher Street towards the end, as you're headed towards the end. This is 27 West 359 Beecher. And this property here used to be the Winfield Creamery property. I remember talking to Louise Stanky after this book was published, and when my grandfather said, you know, that no, Kevin, this was where the creamery was at, right on your property. And part of the house, I think, used to be 1 story, and then it burnt down. The creamery had burnt down. I think even the house had burnt down for a while. It was totally rebuilt on there. So this house is kind of still standing. And this is actually a deed, which I think I've given a copy to the Historical Society. When they sold the property to Matt Mueller, I think, wasn't it? And he became prominent too in the city. I think he was a bachelor. I don't think he ever got married, from what I know. And things. So he purchased the property. And my grandfather, I think it was actually Casper Schlick that purchased it from Matt Miller. And then after that, Casper's brother or son, Albert Schlick, lived in that property for a while. And then after Albert moved out, my family moved in on that house. So this is the house I grew up in as a kid, probably, yeah, elementary school, probably up to high school, through college. So that's when my parents lived until this later. But the significance of this cooperative creamery was that it was a substantial business that ran out of the city of Village and Winfield here. For instance, I've got some facts down here on the bottom of the screen. It consumes, and this was from Rufus Blanchard's 1882 history of Winfield or DuPage County, 6,000 pounds, which is 750 gallons daily of milk were brought in there. I'm trying to read what else is on the slide, but I can't. So, but they also made butter there. So a lot of the farmers could bring their excess milk they had, sell it to the creamery. And in turn, I'm sure the creamery ended up making it into butter and cheese to sell to area families. But also, most importantly, a lot of that was probably shipped into the city of Chicago and sold. Early morning milk trains going into the city of Chicago and dairies. Because again, keep in mind, we had such a codependency, which we probably don't want to admit, with the city and the suburbs together, of how closely knitted we were together, economically and environmentally wise, and things, with the amount of dairy farms and the products. So in turn, we ship the raw products in, vegetables too, things we grow out in the suburbs out here into Chicago. Things came back as finished products, whether there was things farmers bought from the Sears Roebuck catalog, came in on the railroad, and they picked them up on there. So it's pretty integral on there. We have other signatures on here. Matthew Elsan, we'll talk about in a second. Saunders Higgins was part of the creamery committee that ran the creamery business on there. So it's a pretty neat document that was in my family's papers and stuff, just showing chain of, that was 1899 was sold. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about William T. Daleiden. He was the only son of Christopher. He was the father of William B. Daleiden, and that also William B. was included amongst 8 children. And if you want to get the next slide, I think I tried to mention their names on here. We're going to talk about the 2 highlighted people a little bit more extensively here, William B. and Christina. John Daleiden. So this is William T. and Susan Elsan Daleiden's family that they had. So you've got 8 children up in there: George, Mary Frida, Edward, Anthony or Tony Daleiden, Catherine Mary, William B. Daleiden, John Daleiden, and then Christina Daleiden, who's the youngest out of the group. So hopefully, I think I got that right. So, of course, the family didn't go without its tragedies. One of the things that when we're doing genealogy research is you can really delve into the newspapers and find out information about what was going on, where was the family at, what was happening. One of the tragedies, my wife was with me when we were really through the microfilm at the Wheaton Library in Wheaton, Illinois. And so there was a description of Christina on here, who died pretty much when she was 12 years old in a tragic accident. So if you are interested in reading more details, I'm not going to read it to you because it's in the newspaper. It's pretty gruesome, so I didn't want to get into that. So she died at the age of 12. And this gentleman here, William T., actually tried to save her life. I could see that as a father, trying to tap out a fire that's caught on her dress is what had happened. So I don't want to read the details on that, but definitely. And then in 1916, William, as part of his business and what he did too, he would go around and he was, I think one of the censuses said he was a woodman. So I took that to mean he would go around chopping trees, playing, saw planks and things for people and help out with that. So he was involved in an accident with one of his large saws. So if you can imagine, there's a 50-foot belt going around. So, and the belt was slipping off, and he decided, okay, I'm going to try to put that on. Well, it didn't turn out too well. So he died in that tragic accident. So you can imagine this lady here, Susan, now was left with what? 7 children. Because this young lady here is now died in that tragic accident. Her dad's now gone. So Susan is left raising these kids. So as a genealogist, you try to wonder, okay, well, let's kind of look at some of the probate records, if there were any probate records, and there were. So even little Christina here had a probate record. And they were going to try to sue the company for the product that she was using to clean the stove, which caught her on fire. So little details on that. And then, so what happened is Susan's brother, Matthias Daleiden, according to the probate record, became the quote guardian and kind of helped out his sister in the raising these kids and stuff like that. So, so that's a big, big tragedy. We've got 7 kids and some of your husbands gone and things. So, and this is the Elsan family, actually the Stephen Elsan family. I don't think Stephen's shown on this picture. And this is from Louis Stankin's book as well. So there's Susan Elsan Daleiden there. And here's Matt Elsan, who we're going to talk about here right now. We were just talking about this during the, another nun, another one of the sisters became a nun there. So a lot of these Catholic fathers and mothers had to feel proud that some of their kids were becoming nuns, or some of them became priests. I don't think, not this family. Okay. All right. And of course, this gentleman up here, Matt Elsan, sorry, that's kind of blocking his face. So that was Susan's brother, who became helper and guardian with the family on there. And he built this building in, I think it's 1920, 24 or 21. I can't remember. So that's going to swing us into, and of course, that became, we all know, John's Buffet later on, and Tavern on there. So this is the Elsan name on that building. So this gentleman was pretty integral as part of this family, the Daleiden family, married into that, with being a builder in the city, a businessman, a merchant in the village here. Okay. So William B. Daleiden, unfortunately, I don't have a picture of him. So if anybody has a picture of Len, so I got kind of a, that's my line type silhouette over there. So the four things I took out of studying his life and the things I've been able to piece together. Number one, he was a U.S. postmaster for the village of Winfield. Also owner of the Bluebird Confectionery and Billiard Hall, prominent Winfield merchant and store owner. And also he sat on the village board of trustees for a while. So he was a leader, definitely. I picked up on that. So we'll go to the next one. He started out, we're going to explain a little more about Bluebird Cafe or confectionery. This is a downtown shot. As you drive down now, this is kind of Chicago Avenue, we would call it now, right south of the railway. This is the second railroad depot shown in this picture. And over here, the reason why I pulled this down is I believe this is probably the Baum store that's on this side of the railroad tracks. This is actually the Baum family that are in front of that store. But this is where William B. actually had his Bluebird Confectionery and Billiards Hall in Winfield. Okay, next slide. But what happened was in 1926, I believe that is, that store was a complete loss. It was one of the most disastrous fires up to that time, second most disastrous fires up against the St. John's fire, over $10,000 loss in terms of the store. So again, we've got, a little bit of challenges, let's put it that way, for the Daleiden family again. So now William B. has now lost his store, which is owned there by William May. This is out of the West Chicago Press. So newspapers, I cannot emphasize that. If you're doing family research, don't ignore the newspapers, because you're going to find a lot of good tidbits and pieces you can put together in there. So you can, I don't want to read the whole article on here, but basically the bottom line is Winfield had no firefighting equipment. A call was sent to Wheaton for their fire truck, and for some reason Wheaton could not or would not answer the call, so they had to call the West Chicago Fire, which you can imagine by the time they got there. And I'm sure the residents here were trying to go, okay, let's do bucket brigade to try to put them out. Total loss for Bill Daleiden. Out of that, though, came the fact that the Elsan building was built, from my perspective. And then we have the Bill Daleiden store. This is a picture from, again, this book, Louise Spanky's book, showing William B. Daleiden, Bill Daleiden's store in 1931. And behind the counter with him is Mrs. Margaret Roth. She's kind of right in here. Their faces, you can't even tell them, but there's Bill and there's his assistant Margaret. Down towards the end, of course, he was appointed postmaster. And most people say, well, today, think much. Postmaster, is it really a job we will strive for or think about every day? But I think you have to realize, too, that if you had to get your mail, guess where you're going to go? You're going to go see Bill Daleiden or Margaret Roth to go pick up your mail, because here's the mailboxes in the back on that thing. But the other things I think Bill sold, I think in this book, Margaret Roth gives a good testimony to Uncle Bill there, Bill Daleiden, on there. She wrote an interview with Margaret Roth. She says, in the early 1980s, Bill's store and post office in the Elsan building, better known today or no longer John's Buffet, was a gathering place for the young people of 350 villages. Can you imagine that? 350 people. Never been a big town to begin with. But the man who greeted each customer was Bill Daleiden, a man who wore many hats. Postmaster, storekeeper, she said, but most of all, friend. And so he offered a lot of things. Margaret goes on in here to kind of give her reminiscences. So he offered something for everybody. You have the kids, you have penny candy, they go out with the penny candy bags, or you can get a soda fountain. He also made sandwiches at his store for people. And for the adults, he didn't neglect them. You had chewing tobacco, I'm sure, regular tobacco, cigars, newspapers, probably some magazines he sold, and some basic goods. Because I keep in mind, this isn't all-encumbering merchant at the time. I think you still have our Higgins store that was still going, probably under a different owner. I don't know at that time, I can't remember. But so this is again north of the tracks on that one corner of what is now Jewel Winfield Road around there. So, okay, back front and center with our family. We're going to talk a little bit more about Susan, my grandmother, and then we'll wrap it up here. So out of her life, the things I picked up, even talking to my mother and my grandmother, I hope we're not running out of time yet. She worked for a while at the Forsyth Rest Home. She married Casper Schlick of Burlington, Illinois. She became a farm owner with Casper of the farm. She was mother to my grandfather Francis and Albert and John. And the interesting fact they pulled from her obituary was they mentioned she was born and died in the same room. How many of us can say that? She was born in the same room, which she was laid out in. This is the proper term. And my mother could still remember in 1945 going to her funeral. Started out at the house. She was sure enough laid out in the front parlor. So, and then I use the census here. She does appear, and the Daleiden name is spelled so many different ways on the census through phonetics. The census taker would take it down, hear what he thought he heard, probably not confirming what he had. But this is Susie. She's a boarder at the rest home. She's working there. This is early 1900s. So this is 6 years before she was married. And the Forsyth Rest Home, pictured here in 1903, it was was on the grounds of which Northwestern Medicine is at. Long and short of it, between the Forsyth Rest Home, it turned into, when Forsyth left there, it turned into a tuberculosis sanitarium. So the Karwoski, Fritz Karwoski, and some of the people still remember people that visited their friends and family coming in on the train from Chicago, wherever, out here to Winfield, visiting with their family. They had time between the trains, so they came, ate some food at Mary Karwoski's dining room or whoever was in charge there, and then headed out on the train on there. So again, it's still a hospital. So in 1906, then Casper and Susan Schlick were married. We get a nice description of their wedding that appeared, of all things, in the Hampshire, Illinois Register, which points out, kind of look broadly when you're looking at newspapers, figure out where these people were living at, what newspapers were in that town. So this is again 9 o'clock. It occurred at the home of the bride's parents. Miss Susan Daleiden was united in marriage to Casper Schlick. That kind of gives you some of the people that were there. Casper and Martin, their sons were there, because this is a description from, I think, Casper's mother is telling the newspaper, this is what happened. We went to my son's wedding in Winfield. It was a great affair. Here's who was there. So this is almost like your Facebook or social media, for example. It's these neighborhood columns, and they're really hysterical to read. Like you find out, well, Aunt Clara went into Chicago to go shopping. So think, like we take pictures of our food we're eating, type things. Okay, so this is the aerial view, probably late 50s of that Daleiden and Schlick farm on Mack Road. The reason why I like this picture is we definitely see, again, I keep going back at this, the dog leg on that road, which you don't see anymore. You also have electrical and utility poles, which are going still in that area in the 1950s. Keep in mind, too, a lot of these rural areas did not have electricity hookup, as we would call it, to a lot of these farm and areas that were off the grid and not too far out afield. That didn't come till the New Deal projects and rural electrification and stuff. So here's a nice view of the barn. And here's the house, your typical L-shaped Midwest farmhouse. This was the garden and vegetable garden for Susan Schlick, and I'm sure Margaret Daleiden that were out here. So you would drive up into here in the courtyard. I remember as a kid in the 60s still going to visit great-grandpa Casper to give him the mortgage check as we bought the house on Beecher Street. My dad would give him. He was in the back bedroom. And I believe this might be Agnes Schlick bent over in the garden. I'm not sure. I can't verify that. A friend was here who could say, yeah, that looks like my mom now. And then some guy had a tractor up there. But the thing about the vegetable garden was my grandfather recalled it. How beautiful of a garden she had, the flowers she grew was growing in there, but mostly the vegetables and how much they had a can to keep and store for their family along that Mack Road on that. So this is again is that shot looking west, and then the next shot is kind of what you look at now. So that farm was kind of laying somewhere around there near the bend in the road on there. So as you're driving down there, kind of think about that. That is Mack Road. Now, I took this picture in 1985. The buildings were torn down shortly after Casper died in 1970. So I think we still have to talk about that, don't we? So go ahead. So here's another great shot of the full family here. We have a little John Schlick. Fred Schlick, I don't think he made it here tonight, did he? He lives in Wheaton. He's my mom's cousin. and stuff. So that was his dad. And my grandpa Frank here, probably adolescence here. And then Albert, his brother, who eventually worked for Chicago Northwestern Railway, I understand as an engineer, worked his way up to become an engineer. Susan Schlick here, and then of course Casper. And the farmers were very proud, definitely, of their automobiles. I can't tell you how many pictures I got of my grandfather showing off his automobile with pride and joy. And then their house, those property and the house and the land. Probably the most valuable things for these farmers was the land they owed. The more the merrier, they were happier with, I think. Their association with the Catholic Church, particularly with the relationship with St. John's Church, was very important for the family, and just the dairy farmers that they were. And this guy was a dairy farmer all of his life on there. Well, in 1945, Susan died. This is her obituary, again, newspaper. A very good description of what happened to her, who was attended at that funeral. They went, actually, St. Irene's by this time was built in Warrenville. So they kind of shifted their attendance to St. Irene's because they're told, okay, these are the boundaries. You go to St. Irene's now. I'm sure they still attended St. John's on certain occasions on that. And this, of course, is the headstone. Susan was buried over at St. John's Cemetery in there. So when you look at this, whoops, is that the next one? Yeah, it is. So the entire extent of Casper and Susan Schlick's property were all of this. This is the 1947 DuPage County Farm Bureau Atlas. They eventually owned a total of 110 some acres along that road. So, okay. And then this is Casper's obituary, which appeared in the West Chicago Press. So he lived pretty much without Susan for 25 years. So he was a widower, living all his life with his son John. Took over the farm. My grandpa Frank eventually took a job over at St. James Farm, became farm manager, started out as a milk boy over there, milking cows and things on that. So that's kind of a description of who was at that funeral. Again, good information on here, the three sons on that. And then, of course, my uncle's mentioned in there too. He had passed away even before his grandfather killed in Vietnam. So, and finally, probably going to be okay. Francis and Frank and May Schlick. There's May Hodes and Frank Schlick. Parents of Frank was parents of Louise Schlick. My grandparents, Winfield residents. They owned a home built by John Armbrust on Beecher Street. And Frank became an employee and manager from the 1920s to 1905 on St. James Farm. So this is a picture, I believe, taken. We still don't have verification of this. This is John Armbrust here with Susan's sister, Catherine Armbrust. Casper is here, and this is my grandfather, Frank Schlick. So he's definitely later on in his teens or early 20s in here. This may have been taken at Christopher Deleiden's old house. I'm not sure about that, but and that picture was in the collection, I think, at the Historical Society, which I got a copy of. So, and this is the bridge that my two grandparents had the picture taken on. There's the road, the farm in the background. The reason why I like to show this picture again, show the rural atmosphere of how rural that area still was here. This is probably early 1930s before they got married. They got married in 1932, right in the middle of the Depression, there, the start of it there. And again, the farm can be seen in the background right back here. DuPage River, which is right underneath them. So that became an important part of their farm life and recreation life for that matter too. So, and then so Frank and May Schlick, eventually, this is my mom. I believe this might be her graduation or confirmation outfit from St. John's Church. She went to St. John's School, probably one of the first group of classes to graduate from there because that newer building was built in 1942. So she was one of the first kids to go graduate from that new building. And that's Joe Schlick there. And that's my grandpa with his Popeye arms. And this is the house that Frank got together with May with John Armbrust to build on Beecher Street. So that's the house, one of the many houses John Armbrust built. I think he also built the one next door to it for that matter. And then the one across the street is where Grandpa Frank's brother lived for a while, Albert Schlick, before I believe Albert relocated and moved to Chicago. And then I later on started out as an infant living in that house, moved across the street when I was pretty much getting into elementary school and fifth grade and kindergarten. So we lived kind of up in the top bedrooms and the bottom and stuff. So and that's final picture here, just my mom and dad at their wedding down at the hall down in St. John's Church, May Schlick and Frank Schlick. There in 1959. So I'll entertain any questions. Thank you for your questions or comments. There's my contact information. I do also want to mention too that I have a blog going on all this information I've been collecting. I've got like 50 some posts on it I've been working on the past 4 months. So if you want to check that out, definitely check it out. Yeah. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Was he the same one that opened the Daleiden store then? Yeah.
Yes, it was. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Same one.
William
So
B.
after the fire,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
he opened the store.
At the Elsan.
Okay, in the Elsan.
Mm-hmm. I had to keep all these things straight because they all had the same first name. So I call them William T and William B. So if you want to click on, I don't know if that's going to go through or not, but click on that the blog that's on there. So and it may not come up. And there's also a link Dawn was telling me off of the Winfield Library's website with web links on there. And it's probably not going to come up because it's got too much stuff. So we'll just click that off on there. That's okay. Yeah. Click that off. Yep. Click that off. Oh, Chrome. Okay. There it is. Yep. So this is the blog I had started. It's got different entries about different family members on here. It's probably going to be pretty slow here, but you're welcome to take a look at it, comment on it, and if anybody has inner information you need to correct or let me know about. So I put things like that up on the blog. I tried not to go, in all honesty, much beyond the 1930 era, because then you're delving into people who may still be alive. So I'm trying to keep it, up to that wall. Let's put it that way. Unless I mention one of the, but all my